put the cockpit in the boat sort of like this. It's what it basically looks like in a laser. I have limits of where I want to steer. I talked a little bit about it last week, but when you steer, there's a pathway that you're looking for in the water to know that you've done it correctly, right? If you do a tack and your pathway looks like that, is that good or bad? Bad. And why is that bad?
And you stop.
You stop, right? So this hard edge is where you stop, and in a lot of cases, if it's windy, if you stop and you're heeled over, you're gonna slide down. So not only are you stopping in your tack, but you're actually losing height in your tack, and this is a perfect 90-degree angle of what we think we're tacking like, but really what ends up happening is it comes sort of like this, where we get that weird question mark turn. Has everyone done a question mark turn before? Right? I know I have, where you tack and you look back and you stall out and then your boat stops, and then it goes again, right? So what I'm trying to fix, and what's going to be the most important thing for today, is just steering so that you don't get a question mark, steering so that you don't get this hard L, hard stop, is just steering through your tack. And the way you do that is with cadence. And this is the path that you're trying to get to, is nice and slow curve, right? So notice a couple things. One, on this is the right path, right? This is the wrong path. With this path, you end up lower than the highest point of where you tack. And this path, let's say you're going to end up half a boat length higher than you would have if you just kind of throw the tiller over. You want to always end up higher because you're actually gaining more distance. If you do like a lee bow on somebody, you're going to get even closer to that person, right? How many people have done a lee bow, tacked, and then they look back and the guy's like an extra boat length above you and you have no idea why, right? And that's the reason, because you steered too quickly, maybe you got a little freaked and throw the tiller over and a little stressful situation, and then you just slide down. So the way I like to do it is by going through these 4 positions. The first is just straight on, just holding the tiller nice and straight, and I call that position 1. The second is what I like to call position 2, which is about 5 to 15 degrees of movement from straight, right? So if that's straight, then we'll call that
Go the other way.
This
Tack
way.
from starboard to port, like your other drawing.
Yeah, so if that's straight, then that's straight, then we'll have like a 5 to 10 degree 5 to 15 degrees, sorry, movement from straight. Notice how this tiller is not all the way to the end of the cockpit. It's just kind of barely off. It's about, let's say, 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches away from the edge of that cockpit, right? And that's going to be our limit. And what this does is this gets you to steer high through your tack, right? So instead of just having a nice hard L, you get height. And the way you get height is kind of holding in this position, holding, just kind of barely steering out, not all the way over, not too far in, just a nice even 5 to 15 degrees out, just steering up a little bit. And now this is the point, this is what I call the critical point, where you have to wait for something to happen. And what you wait for is you wait for your boat to lose speed. So a tack, ideally, is not slowing down and being fast from one tack and fast to another tack, right? So we ideally want to start our tack fast and end our tack at the same speed. Gets in the gray area of the rules, but once you do it really well, then you can actually finish your tack faster than you went into it. It turns into steering and all that, and a lot of judges will call you on it, but I like to be of the opinion that if you're not going to try to push the limits of boat handling, everybody else is going to push the limits of boat handling, and they're just going to sail right by you. So first we get our height by holding it just 5 to 15 degrees out and waiting for that critical moment where we feel our boat slow down. And when we feel our boat slow down, then we go to our position 3, which is kind of our most important position in terms of how far you're steering. And that's what I call the poke almost. So this is position 2, this is position 3. Position 3, from straight, is just to the corner of the cockpit, right? So you start, you have your speed and your tack, right? Quick caveat is you can't start your tack unless you have speed, right? So if you're completely dead in the water and you try to go for a tack, you're just going to be dead in the water and you're not going to move, right? So in order to have a good tack, you need to have speed first. So if you're drifting backwards at the start line, or if someone hit you and you're just completely stopped and you try to do a tack, you're only going to make it worse. Just sail first, get some speed, and then go for a tack, right? So in position 3, you hold it right to the corner of the cockpit and you're waiting for a couple things, right? You're waiting for the sail to come across and switch. You're waiting for the boat to heel over a little bit, right? And you're waiting for the bow to just swing past head to wind, right? So you hold in that 5 to 15 degree area to get the height. Once your boat slows down, poke to the corner of the boat, push it through head to wind, and then comes the flatten. How is a laser hull kind of shaped? Is it kind of flat, very curvy? A little bit flat, right? It's sort of a planing hole. If you look at the back of a laser, it's almost perfectly flat, right? And then if you look at the bow, it's a nice deep V. And if you flip it over, it goes from a V and then kind of comes back to flat on the stern of the boat, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to engage that kind of curve in the boat, in the bow of the boat, to help us steer, right? When we lean the boat to leeward, which way is the boat's turn?
Upwind.
Up, right? So we head the boat, lean the boat into leeward, boat heads up. We lean the boat to windward, boat heads down. So when we flatten, the natural curve of the boat wants to head the boat up, right? And a lot of times you're gonna see people, when they flatten, if this is straight on, they're gonna pull the tiller to the same way that they were turning, right? So if you tack this way, where this was straight, then you're pushing out, and then pushing it all the way that way. When you flatten, you're trying to head the boat down when the curve of the boat wants to head up. So that's where you get into a lot of times that hard L, that question mark, right? It's because you're fighting the forces on the boat. The force of the boat wants to head the boat up, but you, who have like the steering power, wants to head the boat down, and you stall the boat out and make it slide sideways, right? So the way you fix that is when you try to flatten, don't flatten, and you can wait a long time on the flatten, which I'll get to in a second. Don't flatten until you're steering just a little bit down, right? It can be straight, but I like to give it maybe 5 degrees, just the slightest bit of steering so that I'm heading the boat up and I'm allowing the curvature of the hull to kind of head me up and shoot me to windward a little bit while I flatten, right? So if this is position 4, right? Any questions with that?
Main out about a foot.
That was my next point.
Sorry.
Great.
We've
So,
only done this a few times.
so the next part comes with main sheet, right? There's a couple ways to steer the boat. You can steer with your weight, you can steer with the tiller, and you can steer with the sail, right? If we pull the sail in, how's the boat going to react?
Head up.
It'll head down. If we pull the sail, let the sail out,
Okay.
it'll head up, right? And the reason for that is we give it a little bit more depth. The breeze wants to push on the back of the sail as opposed to the front, right? Because the sail will always luff from the front part of the sail first. And if we have a lot of power in the back of the sail, it'll head the bow up. And if we pull the sail in, we put more power in the front of the sail, pushing on the front of the boat, heading the boat down, right? So there's a critical moment where you can trim in too early, you can let out too late, right? So in position 1, you're sailing, you're nice and straight. In position 2, you're starting to head up. As you head up, you also want to pull the sail in, and we know that heads the boat down, but we're getting to the point where as we cross through head to wind, right, we want the wind to just switch from one side of the sail to the other without luffing, right? So you see a lot of people will have their sail out and it goes through head to wind, and then it luffs until they head down. Then it fills, and then they get going again. So what we're trying to minimize is that luffing period through the tack, right? So as you head up, you pull your sail in block to block, get that sail as tight as possible, because now there's not a lot of wind. If you're sailing close hauled and you pull your sail in all the way, then it's going to head the boat down. But because we're sailing a little bit above close hauled, we kind of don't have that wind pushing on one part or the other of the sail, heading the boat in one way or the other. And we're just trying to make the sail as tight and as flat as possible so that it doesn't luff in between. So we head up, pull the sail block to block, and then once we get to that critical moment where we feel like our boat is as slow as it can be without being stopped, we poke it, boat switches, we do the actual tack, and then it comes to the flatten, where we want to let the tiller a little bit to leeward, head the boat up, but also let the sail out, right? When we let the sail out, if you think about like a paddle, right? For example, a paddle going through the water. If you go straight on with a paddle, right? It has these whirlpools or whatever, and it's really hard to pull the paddle through the water, right? Think of your sail as a paddle through the wind, right? If it goes straight on, you're gonna stall out and kind of get all these kind of whirlpooly, spinny thingies, right? But if you let the sail out, just like if you turn the paddle to one way or another, you're actually guiding the water one way, right? So let's see if I can draw that out a little bit better. If you push the paddle kind of this way, then the water comes around and goes like that, right? We don't want that to happen because we're kind of stalling out the sail, and we're just kind of using a lot of brute force, and that's what stalls out the boat completely. We want to turn the paddle a little bit sideways, right, and let the wind hit and escape in one specific way, pushing our boat forward, right? So there's water going back, but the force of the paddle really is kind of going forward, right? So with a sail, we let the sail out. Don't trap all that air in. Let the air escape out, pushing our boat forward, right? So the more mainsail or sheet that you can let out, the better. It sort of comes to a comfortable thing, but my benchmark for letting the sail out on attack is around 2 feet, right? So a good amount of sail out, because the harder you flatten with the more sail out, the more power you're kind of just escaping out through the leech of the sail and pushing your boat forward. Any questions on that?
So, when you ease, when you have a big roll tack, and I think that's what you're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
So, my understanding is that when, I'll see you and some of the younger kids, they'll really snap the boat down, which to me is like acting like a paddle through the water where you're really pulling yourself through. And so you're also at the same time sheeting in that 2 feet to, I'm going to say, compress the air that's in that sail at the same time.
After I flatten?
As I'm assuming that as you're flattening the boat through the process, you're up high, you're virtually, if you were to take a snapshot, that boat hull or the deck is at 45 degrees. Your feet are in that corner of the cockpit. Your torso is up over the top of that, and you're trying to snap that whole rig down flat, and at that same time, you're sheeting in.
When I'm flattening?
Yeah.
So when I flatten, okay, so does everyone understand the steering? Can I erase that? Okay, great. So there's a couple ways that you want to flatten a boat, right? If we think about, let's say our water line is just the horizontal of the board. If our boat looks like this, So there's three kind of heels here, right? The middle is super heeled over. The far, what is that? Your far right over here is kind of right on the edge of being perfect. And then your far left is what I would call a little bit under heeled, but this is actually where you get the most power. So when you flatten with the boat heeled over completely, right, and you have your sail in all the way, right, first of all, you're paddling that breeze like I just talked about. And second of all, your force as you flatten isn't actually helping you flatten the boat, right? So if we look at this, you see a lot of people, especially young guys, when they're first learning out to flatten a boat, they heel these boats and they get really heeled over, and then they almost it looks like they're breaking their back, bending completely over and just putting a lot of force into the flatten, right? Well, when you flatten and your boat is super heeled over, right, and you're trying to bend your back to flatten the boat, the force of your legs, which are the flattening, like the thing that's actually attached to the boat, is actually pushing down, right? It's so heeled over that you're trying to flatten and you're pulling up, but you're not actually pushing the boat over this way like you want to. You're pushing the boat down into the water a little bit more. And when you do that, you slide, right? So this is how I like to think about attack is, first of all, I try not to get this heeled over all the time. I like to be sort of like right at this level of not where I have to fight it to flatten it, but just enough so that I'm comfortably able to flatten, right? And then the next is kind of what I call the sweet spot, or where you just get the most like juice out of your flatten. So if you ever find yourself in a position like this where you're super heeled over, the first step is to let the sail out, right? Dump some of that power. If you're trimmed in all the way, then the wind is just pushing on the sail, pushing you heeled over, keeping you heeled over, all that. And when you flatten, you're pushing the boat down and letting it drift sideways. So when you have it heeled over just a little bit like this, right, you're at the point where if you let your sail out, so you always want to let your sail out if, let's see how I can draw this. So if that's your sail, right, and that's your block, you want a little bit of sheet out, okay, as opposed to your sail all the way in, right? Because then you stall it. You're paddling the wind here and you're letting the wind escape here, right? But with the curvature of the boat, again, because lasers are so flat, if you had a really like deep V of a hole of a boat, you might be able to get away with flattening it a little bit harder when it's a little bit more heeled over, like it for these guys who've sailed 420s before, right? If you flatten it when it's super heeled over, it's actually not as bad because they have a really deep V in the bow of their boat. With a laser, because it's a lot flatter, we gotta wait a lot longer in order to get that flattening power, right? So for me, I get to this point where it's super heeled over, then I wait. If I'm at this point where it's super heeled over, I wait until I get to this like kind of sweet spot where it's not super heeled over, it's not super flat, and then I wait 2 seconds. I count in my head, I go 1, 2, and then I flatten, right? And what that extra flatten does is it gives me that little extra boost because now I'm actually flattening with the hull of the boat as opposed to pushing the rail in, number of things, flattening with the wrong force. I'm actually tipping the boat over because the hull is so flat and letting the power of the sail escape back, pushing the boat forward. So just to very basically go over it, steering straight, 5 to 10 degrees, wait, hold for a second, let it glide up into the wind, trim my sail in block to block, wait for that moment where it feel like my boat's almost completely stopped. Then I push my tiller all the way over to the corner of the cockpit, let the sail come across. By that time, your boat should have already rolled because if you steer slow enough, the wind will catch on the other side of the sail and you're not going to have to do any rolls. Then I cross the boat, switch my hands, let the sail out, wait 2 seconds, let the boat flatten a little bit before I even flatten, just my weight on the other side of the rail. Then I flatten, and I get a little bit of a boost. Once I get that boost, I let the speed take me forward, and then I trim my sail back in and keep sailing upwind. Any questions? Okay, for jibes, it's pretty much the same thing, except you want to use no steering, but you have to have your sail out, right? So downwind is just really dependent on how you steer with your weight. So the more that you can roll the boat with your weight, the more that you can head up by leaning in, the more you can head down by leaning to windward is the better, but I'm not going to overwhelm people with that right now. We're just going to focus on tacks and doing those correctly. So any questions? All right, great. I think that was good.
Can I add one quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So one thing I noticed you did really well yesterday is like at start you could just accelerate really faster than anyone else on the fleet.
Yeah.
So I know it's a separate topic, but since it's a little related, can you just say a few minutes of like if you're slow before the start at 10 seconds or 5 seconds and you really need to get going, can you give us some advice on how to get that heel into a flatten to accelerate at the start?
Yeah, great question. So for accelerations, it comes down to that half of a tack, right? So if we look at our position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, you're kind of just going for position 4 and maybe a little bit of position 3, right? So for position 3, it all kind of happens opposite, right? So instead of steering the boat and heading up, you're going to head the boat down, right? So for an acceleration, first of all, you need to have your vang on. If you don't have any vang on at the start and you try to do an acceleration, then without the leech tight and holding the power in the sail, then it's just going to spill out and you're not going to have any power in your sail. So first step is put a little bit of vang on. If it's almost go time, I'll put almost all my vang on, right? As much vang as I need to. And I talked last weekend about a block to block setting, right? Trim your main sheet in block to block, pull the slack out of your vang, and mark where that block is on your vang. Find that marking, pull it, and especially in this breeze, you're probably going to pull it to that. Pull it to block, and then go to position 3 where your tiller's all the way at the end of the cockpit, but you're sitting on the same side as the tiller, right? You're not trying to head up and tack. You're just pulling it to you, head the boat down, heel, let the sail out, and then most importantly is go to position 4 where you're steering just a little bit up, letting the boat kind of use the curvature of the boat. Don't fight your forces with how you're steering, right? Flatten, and then go, and then trimming your sail. So in light breeze, which might not be now, so it's good we wait a little bit. In light breeze, then you flatten really hard, wait a second, and then trimming your sail. Because if you flatten really hard and then immediately trimming your sail, you're kind of just stalling the sail almost immediately, right? So the way I like to think about it is bleeding power, right? So the main thing is just flatten really hard. Make sure that you're not going to pull on your sail, steer, or do anything until you feel that the boat has gotten a little bit slower, right? Especially for how I steer downwind or how I sail downwind. I'm not going to take a puff down until like I feel, or a puff up, sorry, not down. I'm not going to take a puff up, right? Unless I feel like my boat has slowed down a little bit, then I'll head up, get some speed, wait till that speed dies down, and then slowly bring it back. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
So before the start, in that last 10 seconds before you're about to power up to get to the start, will you have your vang on at block to block?
Yes. So at 10 seconds, I put all my controls on. So for those of you guys here who were here last weekend, I think I did it every race, but I have a routine where at 3 minutes, I pull in my sail, put on all my controls, get my boat set how exactly I was going to sail it in the race, sail upwind for 30 seconds, tack, make sure it's the same on the other tack, then come down and get ready for my start. So in that upwind, in that little 30-second upwind, right at 3 minutes, I'm looking for where's my vang set, Where's my Cunningham set? Is my out haul good? And then how is my main sheet trimmed for this breeze condition? I really only need to remember two things: three things: how my main sheet is trimmed, how my vang is set, and then how my Cunningham is set. I set my out haul and forget my out haul. Set it on the upwind. Don't change it throughout the start. At 10 seconds, I put all my controls to exactly how I had them in that 3-minute period before I sailed upwind. I had my vang there. I put it there at my pre-start check. I put my Cunningham where it was at my pre-start check. So everything is set to ready to just go before go, right? So at 10 seconds, in really big fleets, if I was sailing in like a 70 or 80 boat fleet, I'd probably set it at 30, 45 seconds. But with the vang set at the last 10 seconds. Everything, if I was sailing in like a really big fleet, Cunningham, out haul, everything except my vang is all set before 10 seconds. And then 10 seconds, it's pull on your vang, head the boat down, lean in, flatten with the sail out while steering up a little bit, trim it and go. Any other questions?